Finally, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of the leftists in our government, one that never ceases to make me laugh, and how they get taken seriously, I'll never know. The leader that they put in is basically like a weird kind of Destiny clone, as far as I can tell, the way that he talks. The Green leader, Zach Polanski, and they recently had a conference, right? It seemed to be attended by a good number of people. Zach Polanski made a couple of remarks at this, which is important for us to bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, because the Greens, although they sort of see, a lot of people see them, I think I certainly do, as the butt of a lot of jokes. Surprises, upsets can happen, and it's important to keep an eye on all of your opposition, right? A couple of things that he said, and it just really gets me how much of our politics nowadays relies on foreign issues. Right, foreign conflicts, all of these things, and how, as Charlie Kirk said on the floor of the Oxford Union, how we are so caught up with whatever else going on all across the world that we won't look at ourselves. We won't look at what's going on in our own country. We won't take control of our own affairs, right? We go on, Israel, 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 right? But we won't look at what's going on in our own communities and how they're being taken over, and how in many instances they've been outright ethnically cleansed, right? And the fact that our government is actively championing and campaigning for it under the guise of diversity and equality and inclusion, all of these things, and multiculturalism, right? How we won't bring ourselves to address, at least in these like liberal, liberal woke circles, of addressing the rape of Britain and the threat that immigration and the threat that ethno-religious supremacy that many of these people are bringing into the country pose, right? And the fact that just because it's going on in England, predominantly in areas of Scotland at the moment, it started creeping into the Welsh cities. But the reason we should care, ladies and gentlemen, the reason you should absolutely care, is because we are landlocked to each other. Their problems with regards to immigration, ethno-religious conflict, etc., are our problems. Because within a day from London, they could be up in Scotland, or they could be in Cardiff and they could be in your homes. Within a day, because we are landlocked to each other, and we live in an age where, whereas it might have taken you several days or weeks to travel up country before, literally on horse and cart, you can do it in a matter of hours now. We should absolutely care. Even if you live far away, even if you live down at the other end of frigging Wales, down in Fishguard and St. David's and all the rest of it, you should absolutely care about the boats coming in at Dover. Because within a matter of days, they could be in your town. And the populations of those towns tend to be quite small. It wouldn't take much to replace them. And we've seen that when literally the government supplants the population of many towns with migrants right on the doorstep of that town in a hotel or in a HMO. All right. Somebody, by the way, recently blew the whistle that Caerphilly Council were trying to get them to use, I believe it was a 17-room or 17-person HMO to house illegal migrants. Yes, it's in Caerphilly, ladies and gentlemen. Somebody put a post up on Facebook earlier on today. I can't remember if I saved that post. I'll see if I can bring it up for you next time. But one of the main things that Zach Polanski seemed to be going on about was the whole refugees welcome thing, was that Keir Starmer is an active participant in the murdering and genocide of Palestinians, right? So again, Israel, 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 migrants, 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 everything on foreign issues, ladies and gentlemen. He also said that we should, according to some people I've seen, de-prescribe Palestinian Action, the recent group that was prescribed as a terrorist organisation because of what they did at RAF Bryce Norton, and backing the legalization of all drugs. Yes, I'm not joking, ladies and gentlemen. Strap in. This was the first clip that was shared on Politics UK. It says that Keir Starmer is an active participant in the murdering of Palestinians. I think what seems to be more, shocking than this is just how many people seem to get up and give him a standing ovation when he says this. And the fact that literally, other than that, the only policy that they have for Britain is eat the rich. That's literally the only idea that they have.
Keir Starmer, in one of the most deeply cynical and morbid acts I've seen in my lifetime, decides to recognise a Palestinian state at the same moment that his government is an active participant in the murdering of the Palestinians, then we will never be silent. Let it be heard across our country, but a call that is now echoing around the world. We must stop selling arms to Israel. We must stop sharing intelligence. We will do everything we can to stop the genocide.
Now, what gets me, talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict if you want. I've seen many people calling it a genocide now. You know, many people are insinuating that October the 7th was, because Israel had prior knowledge of it, was maybe used as the impetus to go in and ethnically cleanse Gaza, right? I'm starting to think, regardless of whether you think it's good or bad, just or not, that was essentially going to be the only course of action, really. That doesn't mean that every Palestinian, every Gazan has to be killed, right? It doesn't mean that it has to be a genocide in that sense. But the fact of the matter really is that when it's just so oil and water like it is in this region, is that from Israel's perspective, you can't have this, just completely hostile, non-negotiable neighbor on your doorstep. And I suppose from the Palestinian side, you see this as a settler colonialism thing. And I suppose in that way, you could then see why they don't want that on their doorstep either. When it's just you keep having heads butting like this, eventually one side is going to have to give way, right? Eventually one side is going to have to give way in some way. Whether that means Egypt takes in the Palestinians from Gaza and Jordan takes in the Palestinians from Judea and Samaria, but whatever way it's going to be, doesn't mean that millions and millions have to die, right? But again, other than that, I don't see how you're going to solve the conflict. I don't like that outcome. Let's make no mistake about it. I don't like that outcome, right? Don't like that innocent Gazans are held under the thumb of Hamas, and that there's, a case that could be made that Israel is playing on that to get its way in terms of its political aims, and as a result, they don't only have their own government and Hamas against them, they have Israel kind of against them as well. And so the regular innocent Gazans that may be the ones protesting this are caught between two rocks and hard places. I don't like that. I don't like that children are dying. Nobody likes it. Right, but I just don't see what other alternative you're going to have, just purely pragmatically. I'm hoping that some positive, well, if you can call it positive, that's that's the wrong word, but that some kind of peaceful arrangement can be made. But again, we've seen this time and time again. When Yasser Arafat, and I can't remember the Israeli Prime Minister's name at the time, went to Camp David with Clinton. The closest we got to it was the Abraham Accords with Trump in the first administration. Trump's now getting a lot of flack for, obviously, his support for Israel, and it's just such a divisive issue. But again, look at the response it gets. Couldn't we have this response if a politician said that they were going to use our forces to clean out the communities where these disgusting gang rapes have taken place with the Pakistani grooming gangs, for example? Would you get the same cheer? Would you get the same cheer for your own young girls and protecting them, getting rid of the communities that did these disgusting, heinous acts to them? Shows how warped our priorities have become. Because we've been indoctrinated into thinking that any care for us as a people and as a nation is a bad thing. Something, therefore, is logically going to fill that gap. And in this instance, it's all the focus on the foreign stuff. But you're putting your focus on the foreign stuff all the time, you lose track of what's going on at home. And then you end up with the problems that we've got. And we need to bring the focus back. You say all this, you can have your positions on it. And admittedly, foreign policy is obviously very important. But the primary focus needs to be at home, because we have enough problems at home. And again, if it is really a genocide, for example, and you think it's a genocide, call it out. But at least put the majority of your resources into, dealing with the problems at home. But that's a priority. That's for us to prioritize. We've, prioritized foreign issues for far too long now. That's where he says again here. He declares that migrants and refugees are welcome here. The threat is from a politics that tries to divide us and point the finger at each other instead of billionaires. This is a nation of neighbours. It was, but then some people decided, Mr. Polanski, that they weren't going to be so neighbourly.
Prime Minister might call this an island of strangers. When Farage says jump, Labour might say how high. But the Greens will never dance to the tune of a Trump-loving, tax-avoiding, science-denying, NHS-dismantling corporate stooge. You might as well stay on your feet, because I'm going to say, we'll say it loud, we'll say it clear. Migrants and refugees are welcome here.
Terrifying. Terrifying, but fair play. He's obviously very charismatic. He's got them in the palm of his hand, ladies and gentlemen. You have to give that to him. He has those people in the palm of his hand, eating out of the palm of his hand. So fair play. You know? What is quite interesting there, though, I'm just going to go back and see if I can find the actual thing. He says this, science denying NHS dismantling. And this is, I believe, something that is not true. But it is something that the left has been peddling nonetheless. That they say that they're going to dismantle the NHS and so on. Right? I want to, apologies a sec, ladies and gentlemen. I thought I grabbed the clip. I did not grab the clip. There we go. This is the clip I wanted to grab. So, this is something that I feel is important to clear up because, you know me, I've been very critical of reform. I saw that Lee Anderson was down in Caerphilly recently, which was good to see. Right, it's a long journey to make, and it's not his constituency, so that's very much appreciated. I think they're going to be the lesser of all the evils, to be honest. Just doing good things, seemingly a lot of common sense things, like raising the tax-free allowance to $20,000 a year. You know, a lot of scrapping the net zero and scrapping the nation of sanctuary nonsense. They're doing a lot of good things in that regard. One of the things that's been said about them, though, which I feel is unfair, and I think if you have criticisms of them, throw them at the way, particularly their treatment of Rupert Lowe, particularly how underhanded they've been and how establishment-like a lot of their figures are, particularly it seems that Nigel Farage, in particular, has a massive ego problem. The deportations plan, especially for England, is nowhere near sufficient. Nowhere near sufficient. 600,000 in the first term, not going to be anywhere near enough. Either seemingly, I'm not sure if the rhetoric has changed on it now, because I think I might have saw something, but I can't remember. I don't even think they would bring themselves to say net negative immigration is, believe the term that Rupert Lowe was using recently. Net negative immigration. I don't think you'd ever hear them using the term remigration and stuff like that, partly because I think that they do want to take advantage of that vote that's come in. I think that's why they've installed Zahir Yousaf as chairman. I think they want to leech off that vote a little bit. Maybe it's a smart play in the short term to get into power so that then they can make the changes that they want. But again, why should we trust them? Why should we trust them? But one lie that does seem to have been peddled about them quite a lot, which I feel is important to clear up, is that they're going to dismantle the NHS. And that does appear that it is not so. This is Laura Ann Jones, who is the Senedd member for Reform. I believe she's the only Reform Senedd member, I believe, for South Wales East. And she's here clearing up some misconceptions on the floor of the Senedd, saying that the Welsh NHS will remain free at point of delivery and free prescriptions will remain. It was good to have the opportunity to set out Reform's clear position on the NHS, as other parties in Wales try to scaremonger and spread misinformation on Reform policy. She needs a grammar checker. She needs to get a Grammarly subscription. But it does seem that they are worried. But this is Laura Ann Jones from the floor of the Senate, ladies and gentlemen, clearing up that bit, which I want to clear up as well. It does seem, like we've seen, the left lies like it's going out of fashion, that Zach Polanski was indeed lying about Reform's position, at least in Wales, on the NHS.
Diolch, Deputy Presiding Officer, can I start by thanking the Welsh Conservatives for bringing forward this debate today? Not only does it give us all a chance to talk about the most important area of Welsh Government responsibility, it also gives me a chance to set the record straight about reform and the NHS. For the sake of telling the truth, as this something this Senate claims to, and it should, uphold and value, though it seems to only believe that when it suits their own agendas, let me be absolutely clear. As the people of Wales deserve the truth, not misinformation, even if it means that some of you will now have to update your Caerphilly by-election leaflets. When Reform forms a government next May, the NHS will remain free at the point of delivery, and free prescriptions will remain just that, free.
So there you go. Straight from the MS of Wales for Reform, straight from Reform's MS, South Wales East side. NHS will remain free at point of service, and free prescriptions will remain. That is their pledge. Whether they will uphold it remains to be seen. But at least you can't accuse them of saying they're going to dismantle the NHS, they're going to do all of this, when that seems not to be true. Or either that, or they're just bare-faced lying. If they're to be believed, which I think, you can give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think you can do that as much on the left at the moment, because they've seen that they don't, they've shown that they don't deserve it, right? Well, at least I suppose we can give them the benefit of the doubt now. That's the best information that we've got on that at the moment. So again, NHS will remain free at point of delivery, and free prescriptions will remain, according to Reform's MS, Laura Ann Jones, which would go in direct refutation to what Zach Polanski just said. Now, whether, again, that is being upheld by, by the Reform in England, who's to say? But I suppose we'll see. We've got a little while to go till next May. Hopefully we can get the traitors out, and who knows, I think a Reform government is pretty, as far as getting anything on the right, as far as getting anything resembling a right-wing government, I think Reform is going to be the most likely outcome. But I think, as we've seen now, because of how nefarious the lefties are, that they'll outright say, I think Mark Drakeford was saying, that their only goal, they do see Reform, I think, as a viable threat. Their only goal is keeping Reform out, so they will form any kind of coalition they can in order to keep Reform out. So again, they'll happily tout that democracy is under threat, this and that, when anybody's saying anything that they don't like. And then minutes that it seems as though a threat to their power will come, they will throw all manner of pretense out the window, and do the same thing that they did to Marine Le Pen in France, but we will see. I mentioned as well, can't remember where the post is, but apparently Zach Polanski said that we should deprescribe Palestine action. I want to give you a little bit of insight to why we prescribed Palestine action in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. So, incident, June 2025. June this year, RAF Bryce Norton. There were members of this group who broke into the RAF base, vandalized 2 Airbus Voyager military aircraft by spraying red paint into their engines and allegedly causing further damage with crowbars. We'll go through a BBC article in a moment where it shows you some of the footage from the Bryce Norton attack. This led to them being prescribed under the Terrorism Act of 2000. Right? All in all, when I asked Grok how much damage had been done in terms of fiscal amount, and I believe Reuters also corroborated this, where this attack, ladies and gentlemen, police statement, according to Grok and according to Reuters, caused £7 million, about £7 million, or about $9.55 million worth of damage to 2 aircraft at the Bryce Norton Royal Air Force Base. That is why they've been prescribed, ladies and gentlemen. So when you see people that there was a lot of big, massive propaganda effort that I believe it was actually a disabled war veteran that was sat in a wheelchair, I believe it was, and he got hoisted away by police for simply holding a sign. Problem is that whether you disagree with, at this point, Palestine actually being prescribed as a terror group, that they are indeed prescribed as a terror group, and as a result, you'll get charged with supporting a terror group if you protest or hold up things in support of them. It'd be like the same if you're supporting Hizb ut-Tahrir or the Islamic State or whatever, but you tend to get away with those, right? So this is where we are, right? So I think it's just important to know that, what happened, and that this is how radical they are. They want to deprescribe a group that's been prescribed as a terror organization. In my opinion, I think you have good reason to do so. Good-natured people and protesters don't break into RAF bases and damage RAF aircraft, right? We have no reason to do that. As people of the nation, we have no reason to do that. We're shooting ourselves in the foot if we do that. But here's some of the stuff from the BBC talking about this incident, ladies and gentlemen, if you missed it when it came around in June last year. Oh, didn't want to play it. There we go.
Understand that the protesters breached the perimeter somewhere else. We've driven a long way around, and there are weaker spots, perhaps covered in foliage, trees in front of them, slightly smaller fences, no barbed wire, and that would probably be slightly easier to access. What the footage shows is them riding e-scooters so they could quickly get to the aircraft that they were able to spray with red paint last night. What the MOD has said is that they were already reviewing security at the various bases it has across the country. This will make that a more urgent priority. They've also said they're still assessing the damage to the aircraft.
So let's pause that a minute because I want to bring it back. This is what happens. You can see there, ladies and gentlemen, if I bring it back to here, this is the red paint, as you can see, that was sprayed into the engine of one of the aircraft. Apparently they've done additional damage with crowbars as well, but they got to the aircraft via using the e-bikes or the e-scooters and stuff like that. So I think you have a good case to prescribe them as a terror organization, especially for the damage that they caused, which obviously will be footed by the taxpayer. 4 were arrested over the pro-Palestine vandalism at UK Air Force Base. So yeah, that's the fact of the matter is he's campaigning for the de-prescription of a terrorist group that is working on behalf of radical Islamic interests. Not in favor of that whatsoever. I think you should be concerned about that. Absolutely. If you're thinking of becoming a Green supporter, that you're supporting more of the colonization and takeover of this country and turning it into one more aspect of the ever-growing caliphate. Last a bit now, though, ladies and gentlemen, something which is particularly even more so potentially dangerous than the de-prescription of Palestine action, right? He said that Zach Polanski backs legislation of all drugs, legalization of all drugs. All drugs, mind you. Apparently, the leader of the Green Party says he wants to legalize all drugs, according to the BBC, calling for an approach, quote, led by public health experts, not politicians. Speaking to the BBC South East ahead of his party conference, Zach Polanski said he agreed with a Kent Green councillor who earlier this year called for the legalisation of all drugs, including drugs like heroin and crack cocaine, the Class A stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, we can only assume then that he would legalise fentanyl, opioids maybe, and all of these other things. You can very easily see how damaging this is going to be. Ladies and gentlemen. Now, some people like to make the case that, weed should be legal and all of these things, but you could very much so make the case that it is indeed a gateway drug. What's her name? Laura Ingraham, or Laura Ingraham, I'm not sure how to say it. Recently went on Fox News in the case that cannabis is the most dangerous drug in America right now. I'm going to play you that video in a moment. Because I think with the open border that Biden administration fostered, I think it's potentially fentanyl that's more dangerous at the moment. But in terms of being a gateway drug, cannabis is certainly something that does need to be talked about. And you can certainly see where areas have legalized it, they haven't exactly turned out as like utopias of like technological advancement and prosperity. It tends to just make you, lazy, apathetic, and really, really hungry. Give you a case of the munchies, right? Not exactly the thing to build the most productive and hard-working people, right? You can make the case for medicinal treatment if you want, right? But just going out and saying you're going to legalize all drugs. But this is a case where they want to focus on, quote unquote, like safe administration and like the things that the Biden administration were doing where, give them clean needles in vending machines and all of this stuff, which funny then you see how that actually contributes to the problem because he wants to enable these problems. And you have to wonder why. What is he actually getting out of this? He said that the war on drugs has absolutely failed and ultimately we need to be having a public health approach. We asked about implications for this for the taxpayer. And he replied, well, I think voters are having to pay right now for a crime that happens. Funnily enough, we could stop the crime from happening if we actually adopted, a judicial system that works and keeping people in prison for the crimes that they commit, right? For violent crime, for theft, rape, and so on. Not letting child rapists roam the streets, right? And making taxpayers foot the bill for that. For the fact that people are in the illegal drug markets for gangs that we see across country lines. All of this is a failure of the fact, again, for far too long, prime ministers have stuck their heads in the sand and said, if we just make drugs illegal, everything's going to be okay. No, because you need strict punishment for people that break those laws, don't you? It's like you need strict punishment for people that commit murder, to stop people from committing murder, right? Somebody committed murder and you said, right, well, that's it. You're just going to be locked in a cell alone for the rest of your life and have your meals through a little hatch in the door. People's tunes would change a lot quicker, right? If prisons were in day camps, for example. Look at the RICO cases against the mob in America. When they were given, Michael Franzi's been open about this, when they were given, the head honchos of the mafia, like 150 years in prison, when they were taking... because then it allowed them to show that they were part of a bigger conspiracy. And as a result, they were able to bring different charges against them. They were able to charge them with racketeering and so on. As a result, even just the regular guy on the street that might just be doing a little bit of drug dealing or whatever, you could charge him with being part of this massive conspiracy. Next thing you know, under the RICO statute, he's then looking at 60, 50, however many years it is in prison, and he's got to do a minimum of about 85% of that time, right? There's no massive early release after like 10 years on good behavior or whatever. No serving like 20% of your sentence. But it was extremely effective. Many people might say it's too far, it's unethical, it should be illegal, whatever, but it was damn effective, right? I think it was William Blakey was the guy who came up with that legislation in America. It was extremely effective, right? Now you have the organized criminals in government that are the problem, which, you can make the case that a lot of them should be charged with RICO as well. But that extremely harsh and effective legislation and the long prison sentences that went along with it are what really brought down the mafia in New York. But really brought down the organized crime families. It wasn't legalizing their activities. It wasn't legalizing drugs. It wasn't legalizing gambling. It wasn't legalizing all of these different things, right? You can make arguments for those if you want, right, as Zach is doing. But it wasn't those who brought down the mafia. It was a effective law statute, right? It was an effective law and ruthless punishment on top of it. That's the approach that we should be taking, but we won't do it because we're soft. We're soft, and that's just the reality of it. But here's that video, ladies and gentlemen. Have listened to this. Let me know what you think. I certainly think that cannabis, you're Charlie Kirk talking about it, for example, it's a gateway drug and all of these things, and you look at other communities where they've legalized it and they haven't turned out, exactly great, right? I think there's a good case to be made for that. Whether it's the most dangerous drug in America right now, I'm not too sure about that, but obviously I live over here in the UK, so I can't necessarily talk about that. I think this will be an interesting perspective. I haven't watched this yet. Let's watch the video.
Knowing what we know now about the link in a certain percentage of especially young men between weed use and violent psychosis and other mental illness, why would we encourage this at any level in our society?
We shouldn't. I consider cannabis to be the most dangerous drug in America right now, by the way, and I'm not trying to slight opioids here, but consider that SAMHSA, the Agency on Drug Abuse, which reported 7.6 million people going to ERs last year from drugs, puts now cannabis ahead of opioids, 12% cannabis, 11% opioids. And that's because of what you just said, because people have underlying mental health disorders and they don't don't even know it. They're suffering from anxiety, depression, maybe a small percentage schizophrenia. The first episode of psychosis that you have is accelerated, unfortunately, if you're a regular pot user or cannabis user. And again, the anxiety disorder can come out from excess cannabis use. And all of that is getting worse and worse. And then the gummies are sitting around and kids end up taking them. And over 20,000 calls to drug abuse hotlines last year, 80% kids. Why would anybody want that? Because they don't realize how bad this is. And cannabis also affects your heart. And cannabis also interrupts your sleep. And cannabis has not been proven to have absolute medical indication. So it's about education, and that's what we're doing here.
I want to bring back one thing he said. If that is true, that is horrendous. I just want to see if I can find it a moment. Where he said, wasn't it 80% of calls to cannabis hotlines were children? Oh, that's horrendous if that's true. Yeah, so he says 20,000 calls to drug abuse hotlines last year, and then 80% of them were kids because people are leaving gummies around and kids are taking them. That's truly horrendous if true. And that's why, again, blanket legalization and like putting them into gummies in this form where children get access to them. You have to put some kind of regulation in place if you're going to do this kind of stuff, I guess, because it's the same way that you would expect in the States where they have the ability to carry firearms and private gun ownership, right? That there are expectations that, especially if you have children, that you keep the gun under, lock and key, you keep it secured so that your kids can't access it, right? With very, very good reason. And you'd expect those legislations to be in place, I would imagine. Obviously, speaking as in a place where private gun ownership is a fucking fairy tale. I don't necessarily know. If any of my American friends who might be watching this want to fill me in, please do. But yeah, I would imagine this would have to be treated quite similarly to that. You can't just have cannabis gummies being left out where kids can take them. And then they're making up 80% of these referrals, 80% of these 20,000 referrals. That's 16,000 cases of kids getting referred to this hotline because they've ingested cannabis gummies. That's not okay. That's not okay. I'm just going to play this video for you one more time, ladies and gentlemen, just so you can really hear that and let us sink in. If you have anything to add on this, please do let me know. But again, when you're hearing that he wants to legalize not just fucking cannabis, ladies and gentlemen, all drugs, crack, cocaine, opioids, right? I suppose in some ways, opioids are kind of already legal on prescription. In some instances, you can get codeine, cocodamols and stuff like that. But again, just want to blanketly legalize all of these drugs. It's going to be disastrous, ladies and gentlemen.
All of that is getting worse and worse. And then the gummies are sitting around and kids end up taking them. And over 20,000 calls to drug abuse hotlines last year, 80% kids. Why would anybody want that? Because they don't realize how bad this is. And cannabis also...
Yeah, absolutely. If that's true, that's horrendous. And we should be taking that a lot more seriously. At least in America, they should be taking that a lot more seriously anyway. But that's why, again, you're hearing the leader of the Greens in this country, ladies and gentlemen, saying, yep, just legalize all of it. Just legalize all of it. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make some edits to my screen on the other side, and I realized I kind of messed it up then. But yeah, this is just, there's no words to just really describe how horrendous this is, how horrendous that would be. So if you're on the left and if you're dissatisfied with Labour, if you're dissatisfied with Plaid, please don't think that the Greens are going to be any better. Please don't think that the Greens are going to be any better. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.